Welcome to Coffee with a Purpose, everybody. On this nice Monday morning, soon to be hot, but hotter tomorrow. Today, we're having a return visit from the Natick 180 folks, Katie Sugarman and others, to update us on all the great things their organization has been working on because of, unfortunately, the problems that we face for substance abuse and so forth. As our custom, let's start with brief introductions just to update folks on who's in the room. And I'll try to do that first with Coffee of the Purpose folks. And then Sally, you can introduce your guests as well, or they can introduce themselves. Let's start with Bill.
Good morning. Bill Ramage. I'm active in town with the Community Preservation Committee and active in church.
Thanks, Bill.
Welcome.
Kathleen.
Morning, I'm Kathleen Donovan. I'm on the Library Board of Trustees, and I'll just note that the library is very interested in supporting the mental health of the community, and we often partner with other groups in programs in that area.
Thanks, Kathleen. Cindy.
Good morning. Thank you for coming. I am a trail steward. I sing in sound and spirit, and I am a picker-upper of litter wherever. Keep Nick beautiful.
Yay. Carol.
Good morning. So, Carol Berkowitz, I've been a Natick resident for over 50 years, and I live on Lake Cochituate, so I've spent many times working for the lake and making sure that it is clean and good for swimming and boating and, yeah, all activities.
Awesome. Thanks, Carol. Sally?
Good morning. I'm Sally Hopkins, and I'm really looking forward to your presentation this morning. I'm also, like Cindy, a trash picker-upper, but why don't we call it beautifier? Because Pat, my brother Pat, hooks us in all the time. But I love doing that for Natick, and this is an exquisite place to be. I haven't been here much longer than about 9 years, but from a Southern California, San Diego perspective, it's beautiful here, and we really need to keep it beautiful.
Thanks, Sally. Martin, are you at your computer?
Yes, I am. Sort of barely. I'm barely getting on. And my name is Martin Kessel. Sort of part of all things Natick town meeting and various other things, but a little bit on vacation now, just due to a medical situation. But hope to participate.
Always happy to have you when you can join, Martin. Brinley.
Good morning. I'm always so grateful for the work you guys are doing. I've taken one of their, I've had some conversations with you guys before. Having two kids, two school-age kids, I think about this subject a lot. And so I'm always grateful for the work. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Brinley. Sarah?
Hi, I'm like other people on this call involved in various things in Natick, town meeting member and community preservation, and also active in church. And having had a friend of my son's unfortunately pass from overdose, I'm very supportive of your work and really interested to hear from you.
Thanks, Sarah. And I'm Doug. I convene this happy group every Monday morning and do most of my volunteer work with the Congregational Church in the center of town. So again, thank you guys for being here. Katie, maybe
Another introduction to be done.
What's that?
Was there another introduction to be done?
Well, there are other folks that I think are all from Natick 180. So
Okay.
Let me turn it over to Katie at this point, and you guys can do as you will. Introduce yourselves, take over the screen, whatever.
Sure. Thanks so much. It's so great to be with all of you, and it's so good to see so many faces I recognize and names I recognize, and maybe another new folk here or there. But my name's Katie Sugarman. I'm the Prevention and Outreach Program Manager in the Natick Health Department, and in that role, I'm also the Coalition Director for Natick 180. I've worked here in Natick for, it's going on 12 and a half years now. Originally a part of Natick Together for Youth, which was a prevention coalition that was grant funded under the schools. In fact, Pat Conaway was on our steering committee for that group and was very much one of the movers and shakers in town who helped me kind of get my footing in Natick and get to know so much more about the community. And I'll talk in just a second about sort of how that work evolved into what now is Natick 180. But before I go any further, I do want to invite my colleagues to introduce themselves. Lizzie and I are in the same office, so I'm going to mute myself while she introduces herself, and then maybe she can hand it over to Astrid.
Thanks, Kitty. Yes, my name is Lizzie Chalfin. I am one of the project coordinators with Natick 180. I've been in this role almost 5 years now, which is kind of crazy. But I'm from Natick originally, so I'm very well versed in everything in Natick, and just good to be in this role. Astrid?
Hi, I'm Astrid Dretler. I precede both Katie and Lizzie in this work in Natick. I've been doing this for about 20 years now. And I am a part-time project coordinator. I am also a very avid dog walker, so I want to thank everybody for their stewardship of the trails. I too am a beautifier, so I like to pick up trash that I see as well. And I also wanted to thank Cindy for coming up to us and speaking with us at the Medication Take Back Day. Cindy, I know you dropped off a couple of vapes that you had found while you were out walking, and it really kind of kicked off our invitation to this group today. So I just wanted to thank you for that. We're happy to be here.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much. And that's actually a newer initiative of ours, trying to collect some of the vapes in town, and if we have some time, we can talk a little bit more about that initiative. Lizzie in particular has been working really closely with some of our high school students and trying to get vapes out of our environment. So I do have a few slides just to give us some framing for the conversation, but my goal is to keep this brief so that we can just kind of have a conversation and try to answer any questions you might have, or hear some of your thoughts and feedback as well. So just to kind of give some framing, I mentioned that Natick Together for Youth was a prevention coalition that I was a part of, and that Astrid, as she mentioned, preceded me on here in town. And when I started with Natick Together for Youth back in late 2013, I had actually been working in Revere for a number of years, working on the opioid crisis. And when I came here to Natick, the opioid crisis was really just kind of building in terms of public consciousness and awareness. We had in early 2014 a couple of very public losses. A couple of young folks in our community who were well known to the community died within a few weeks of each other due to overdose. It was also right after, folks might recall, the late actor Philip Seymour Hoffman died of an overdose. And I think there was a lot of kind of national attention on the issue. And then to lose two very young people in our community in their early 20s to overdose, I think shook a lot of people up. And one thing I had seen work in Revere when that community was really becoming a little bit more prepared to take action around the opioid crisis was the fact that they started a vigil in their community. And that created opportunity for people to sort of come together and grieve together, but also start to recognize how many people were touched by the issue, because it is a stigmatizing issue. And while I think the stigma has improved over time, I think there were a lot of families kind of struggling with this, issue of addiction in their families or in their households in private, and creating some opportunity to come together created some opportunity for connection too. So we held our first vigil in, I believe it was March of 2014. And then we've kept that event going annually now since then. We hold it near the holidays now. But kind of growing out of that original vigil was, a lot of community members who were impacted by the opioid crisis coming together. Folks are probably familiar with SOAR Natick, which is a local nonprofit of families who have been touched by addiction, and they are some of our closest collaborators and conspirators in this work in the community. They are the ones who really lead the charge on the Purple Flag Project in front of the First Congregational Church. We always help them with the marketing and we help with the planting of the flags, but that is truly a grassroots effort that SOAR Natick started, and we are so honored to help support. And frequently when we're out in the community talking about Natick 180, when people, are trying to kind of figure out who we are, they'll say, "Oh, are you the Purple Flag people?" And we'll say we're associated with the Purple Flag people. They're some of our favorite people in this community that we love working with. But it's really because of their bravery and their willingness to share their experience at community meetings, public meetings, school committee meetings. I mean, really being open about how this issue touched their families, that we were able to gradually get more support and traction for this work here in Natick. So not that you need this whole history lesson, but I will say the work in Natick around substance use prevention goes back many, many years to like the Dukakis era. Natick has had different formulations of community groups working on these issues over the years. In 2011, we got federal grant funding. That was what funded that Natick Together for Youth Coalition, and the schools held that funding, and that's where Astrid was a volunteer, but who also then was working in a paid coordinator role for the coalition. That's where my involvement occurred. And then, by around 2016, as one grant was ending, the town recognized we had some advocacy from our then Board of Health chair, as well as our then town administrator and our public health director, to try to invest a little bit more, because sustaining things only on grounding can make things very unpredictable. And we were in the midst of a public health crisis. So around 2016 was when we got funding with approval from town meeting. So thanks to our town meeting members on this call as well, to actually fund one position in the town to do this work. So that's the position that I currently hold. We got a second round of federal grant funding in 2018. That allowed us to also bring on Lizzie and the role too. And we now have, and then we kind of recalibrated the prevention work in town and the work around trying to support people who were actively experiencing substance use disorder into this one continuum that we called Natick 180. We now have a combination of both health department funding, some small grants, but then we also have opioid abatement funding, or opioid settlement monies, which are essentially monies that the town has gotten from these large scale opioid settlements that have occurred with the manufacturers and distributors of opioids. And I can talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But we had community members who helped us come up with this Natick 180 branding. And as you can see here, it kind of runs the spectrum from sort of like early education and prevention through support for treatment and access to recovery support services. Doug, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, and maybe this slide is addressing it. I was just wondering to speak about the symbolism of what does 180 represent in your name?
Yeah, so it's kind of twofold. So one is this 180-degree continuum, the idea that we weren't just working in prevention or just working on the treatment and recovery side, that we're trying to address this entire 180-degree spectrum. And then part of it is that change is always possible, right? It's always possible to make a 180. And so the idea that you can be headed in one direction and you can make an about face, and that we've seen that time and time again with so many of the folks that we work with in recovery who have these amazing stories of, needing to be Narcan, overdosing and then receiving Narcan, 10 times over the course of their active use years, and now they're in long-term recovery and they're doing a lot of work to support other people who are actively, experiencing addiction. So we know change is possible because we see it in the lives of people that we work with every day. So this is just our mission statement, but essentially we're trying to address the factors in our community. We're kind of looking at this from an environmental strategies perspective. So the idea that we're trying to address the factors that contribute to addiction, those risk factors that might exist in our community, and try to foster or build up the protective factors that can reduce risk in our community. We see addiction as not a character flaw or an individual's moral failing or anything like that. We really try to approach this with empathy, respect, and data, and we really try to look at the systems around people and how those impact their opportunities for support, and see where we can try to put more leverage more resources in the community to build more supports for families and for individuals who are experiencing mental health and substance use challenges. These are just a few of the folks from different sectors of the community, different community groups and agencies that we work with, and this doesn't even capture all of them. I mean, I know we were talking about, the Morse Institute Library. Thank you so much for, for mentioning, Kathleen, the support that the library has been an amazing collaborator to us. We're actually chatting with Mickey right now about bringing back a screening of Recovery City, which is a documentary that has aired on PBS, and that was actually created, it was completely done by a local documentarian who's also a teacher at Natick High School. It's gone on to win a bunch of national awards, but it literally follows the stories of several women in recovery in the greater Worcester area and the struggles and challenges they encounter in their recovery process. It looks at the court systems, at the Department of Children and Families, all these different agencies around folks that can be helpful, but can sometimes also create some barriers or stumbling blocks for folks, often unintentionally, but seeing it through the eyes and the experiences of these women are so powerful. And we're looking forward to bringing that back in September, which is National Recovery Month. So hope you'll be able to join us for that screening because it's a powerful film. Just to give you a sense of who is a part of Natick 180, these are just a few of the folks who are sort of in leadership positions, but we've tried really hard to maintain a balance in the leadership of Natick 180 because it's a coalition that brings all these different folks in the community together, but it's hosted by the Natick Health Department because we have to have someone who sort of like supervises us as staff and helps us manage the finances and everything. We wanted to have an equal balance of municipal voices, municipal leaders. So we've got Chief Hicks and Chief Furschke, and we've got representation from Dr. Spash and our superintendent's office and our public health director, Mike Boudreau, and several elected officials, a liaison from the Select Board, the Board of Health, and the school committee. But we also wanted to make sure that all of those municipal voices were being balanced by grassroots community members who can speak to what folks are experiencing in our everyday community spaces. So we've got SOAR Natick, we've got Spark Kindness, we have a representative from Newton Wellesley Hospital. Our representative from Metro West Medical Center there has not been as much consistency there, unfortunately, because of all the turnover they've had. It's been a little challenging for us to get the level of engagement from Metro West Medical Center as we would like, but we do have the Natick Interfaith Leaders Association. We have had a member in recovery. We're working on, that person has had to step back, so we're working on getting a new person in recovery. And then we also have space on the steering committee for at-large members. So if anybody here is ever interested in getting involved, you're more than welcome. But we really think it's important to make sure that we're balancing, the voices of people who are out in the community with the folks who know how to make things happen in municipal government. We need a little bit of both in order to make progress. We did a strategic planning process a few years ago. Without getting into all of the details, I'll just say the priorities that we identified in that process that have been kind of pushing our cart forward for the last few years has been focusing on these 4 buckets. One around prevention and treatment for mental health concerns, because we see mental health as being such a huge component of what puts people at risk for substance use related challenges. Addressing community norms through alcohol and cannabis, around alcohol and cannabis use to legalized products that I think a lot of folks may have a lot of misunderstandings of around what the risks risks are associated with them, the harms from opioid and other illicit drug use. So that's especially where we talk about harm reduction and how do we connect people to treatment. And then lastly, support for people seeking or maintaining recovery. How do we kind of foster and build a culture in our community that's really focused on recovery? So I won't get into lots of details on every single one of these issues because we could be here all day, but I will say this is just a snapshot of some of the prevention work that happens in our schools that Lizzie in particular is the lead on, and Astrid does a lot of work on as well. A lot of it has kind of been focused on getting into the schools themselves. Lizzie leads is one of the advisors for a high school group of young leaders who are trying to make a difference in their community around substance use. Vaping prevention has been their big passion in the last few years. They're the ones who have been spearheading our efforts to also get vapes out of the community and out of our waterways and out of landfills. So we now also have 2 middle school level groups that are connected to that group as well. Lizzie goes down into the middle school health classes and presents to students about mental health, about risk factors associated with vaping and alcohol use, also brings those high schoolers down to the 8th grade health classes to try to dispel some of the misunderstandings and myths that 8th graders might have. They might think that, oh, everybody in high school vapes and drinks and stuff like that, and that's actually not the case. The data shows us that it's actually a very small percentage of students that are using any of those products, especially on a regular basis. But hearing that from high schoolers is much more compelling than any of us walking in and trying to convince middle schoolers that not as many students are vaping and drinking as they might think. So that's a very quick snapshot of some of our prevention work. We also try to get Narcan out into the community. So we provide trainings on how to use Narcan. Narcan is the overdose reversal agent that will overturn an opioid overdose. We will do that for local community groups and agencies. That picture on the screen is from a training we did over at the Brandon School. We've done presentations in a number of the local, both private and public schools. And we also now have a collaboration. Originally it was with an agency out of Framingham. Now it's an agency out of Franklin. We also now have a transportation program in place so that folks who are trying to access treatment or recovery services, if transportation is one of their barriers to accessing those services, we can get them connected to a Lyft ride for free. And you'll see us around town doing a lot of different recovery activities. That picture down in the bottom right-hand corner was at TCAN from a couple of years ago. That was a screening that we did of that Recovery City film that I mentioned. But we work with amazing groups, including the Mass Organization for Addiction Recovery, that's our friend Sunshine Scotty in the upper right-hand corner. We were just out on the Common 2 weekends ago, making mocktails as part of the wellness fair and alongside some of our recovery organizations at that event. And we will be continuing to plan more recovery events going forward. This is a snapshot of our opioid overdose data through last year because folks are often curious about where the trends are. We did have 1 fatal overdose last year, but that was down from a high from back in around 2021, 2022, where we were losing I think at the peak, we lost 7 people in 1 calendar year. 2024, we didn't have a single fatality that our police or fire responded to. And so you can see our overall overdose rates are coming down. However, we are kind of increasingly paying attention to other substances and overdoses that could be associated with cocaine. Kratom is also something that we're working on some regulations on currently with our Board of Health. That is an opioid-like substance that is sold often in gas stations and convenience stores. And so we're working right now to try to address that through regulations.
Could you spell that word? I didn't catch it.
Yeah, Kratom, Kratom.
Thank you. Thank you.
If anybody happens to like watching what's his name? John Oliver. He actually did quite a comprehensive piece only probably 2 or 3 weeks ago that was about different chemicals and substances that can be purchased at convenience stores and gas stations that are not banned or regulated at a federal level, but that's kind of left up to localities and states to handle themselves. And so kratom is currently this substance that's prevalent in a lot of, we've only found it in a couple here in Natick, but we're working on trying to put some regulations in place to get those out of our local convenience stores. So threw a lot at you there, so I apologize if it was overwhelming or if it was more information than you were looking for, but we're happy to answer some questions or have kind of a conversation if folks had some thoughts or questions that they wanted to throw out there. And I see my friend Pat Conaway's on here. Pat, so good to see you, my friend.
It's okay.
Yeah, that was a great presentation, Katie. I jotted down a few different questions that I'd like to explore a little bit more, and obviously invite other folks to raise their hand and ask things. Let's see. I guess the first one, maybe queuing off of what you were just saying about the kratom substance, and I had actually written down cannabis here, but one of my takeaways here is that over the years that you've been doing all this work, which which particular products or substances in the community that can represent abuse or problems keeps changing. So I just, can you speak at all to kind of how hard has it been to keep up, or like, is there a portion of your function that focuses on educating yourselves so that you can then educate us about what are the changing risks?
Yeah, I mean, I think that where we've seen some of the most change has been both in this space around, like, say, tobacco products, where when we're talking about youth substance use prevention, we're often focused on what are the substances that young people are most exposed to at younger ages, because we know scientifically the data tells us every which way that the younger a young person is when they start using an addictive product, the higher their risk is for addiction over the course of their lifetime. And tobacco, or I should say nicotine more specifically, is so addictive and can be and have such impacts on that sort of like very special and important time of development that's happening in those teen years. That the way that nicotine products have evolved over the past decade has been, I'd say, one of the steepest learning curves for us. So, gone are the old school cigarettes and chewing tobacco products that might have been popular in the last 50 plus years, and vapes have changed dramatically over the course of the past 10 years and what they look like and how they're used. Now most of them are these single use devices, which is why you'll see a whole device tossed on the ground rather than just the cartridges that we were finding 8 years ago or so. But so those provide a very quick delivery system. They come, even though in Massachusetts they're not allowed to be sold as flavored products, you can still get them online and in other nearby states as flavored products. So that makes them appealing. It helps cover up the gross taste. They're very subtle. You can take a quick hit off of a vape without it being that noticeable to a lot of people. And then even beyond that, now we have what are called nicotine pouches. So Zyn, which is spelled Z-Y-N, is one of the most popular brands right now, but there are a bunch of other brands as well. A lot of influencers online and people with podcasts have their own brands. I believe Tucker Carlson has his own brand of tobacco, of nicotine pouches that he promotes. And these are super concentrated nicotine salts that you can basically put in the corner of your mouth or in your cheeks, sort of like old chewing tobacco, except, and I should say they sort of look like, especially for any of the folks who've ever on the call, who've ever purchased a pocketbook or a purse, when you buy a new bag or a coat, and in the pockets, there might be those little silicone packets. They look a lot like that. They're small like that. but you can put them in your cheek and they absorb directly through the mucous membranes in your cheek into your bloodstream, and it gives you a head rush. Like it gives you a little bit of like a high when you first use it. It's a stimulant, so nicotine gets you energized and everything, but you crave it. I mean, you can get very addicted to these products. And those are even more subtle to use than like the vapes because they don't have any aroma or anything like that. You don't have to spit like you had to with chewing tobacco and that sort of thing. So that evolution of tobacco products, given how addictive nicotine is, and I mean, we work with folks in recovery from opioid addiction who say that nicotine was harder for them to kick than opioids. I mean, like it's just that addictive. So I think the evolution there has been probably the most startling when it comes to like the youth prevention side of things. But I also can't downplay cannabis either. I mean, like, cannabis edibles have been around in different forms for decades, but the concentration of THC and the current products that are available both through legitimate stores that are regulated by the CCC and what young people can find online, the concentrations of THC are really powerful, and the opportunity for accidental overdose. I say overdose, recognizing that, overconsumption of cannabis doesn't necessarily lead to the same level of life-threatening situation typically that you see with other, other psychoactive drugs. However, the psychiatric reactions that people have when they have consumed too much THC, I mean, we are seeing a huge spike in young people reporting these, ill effects, and even kind of an uptick of schizophrenia and other types of severe mental health disorders that have in some cases been triggered by cannabis use or appeared to be correlated to cannabis use. So folks reporting extreme paranoia, and in some cases getting themselves into life-threatening situations when they're under the influence because they are experiencing hallucinations, that are, terrifying, and so injure themselves as they're trying to get away from something. Or so I think the evolution of those two spaces in particular, Astrid, Lizzie, and I are constantly in communication, not just with our local first responders to see what they're hearing and seeing locally, but also to our colleagues. Our network of professionals doing this work in our region has grown substantially over the last 10 plus years, thankfully. So we are in constant communication with each other, but we're also constantly doing online webinars and going to conferences to try to stay on top of all of this information because the science is a lot to digest. Our messaging to young people is consistent in a lot of ways because our messaging to them is constantly wait as long as possible. So we're not necessarily saying the like just say no messaging of the 80s, because sometimes that messaging, I'm one of 4 kids. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. DARE worked for me because I was not a big risk taker. I have a younger sibling who struggled with mental health and alcohol use in his teens and 20s. We grew up in the same exact household. For him, DARE was not as resonant. And so our messaging is constantly wait as long as possible. 21 is the magic number. If you can wait till 21 before you ever try a substance, your chance of addiction is so dramatically low. I won't say it's non-existent, but it's much lower. The younger you are when you start tobacco, cannabis, alcohol, any of it, the higher your risk for addiction. So get as close to 21. If you can wait till after 21, great. If you can wait till 25, that's even better. Your brain is still developing well into your mid 20s, but our message is constantly delay. So
I see Pat has his hand up, but that message of delay, maybe I've just had my head in the sand, but that's news to me that it's so tied to the development of the brain that addiction is such a greater threat when the substances are used at a younger age. But let's go to Pat and then Sally after that.
Yeah, great to hear from you, Katie, and everything in the program, because I know it's very multifaceted. One thing I'm finding, and I'm picking up a lot of the liquor and items where the kids are drinking it, there's a sort of mix between the the high energy drinks, the Red Bulls, and a lot of nips. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
tremendous amount. It looks like you see it in the student parking lots. It kind of makes me feel like the kids are, getting out of school, go to their cars, they take a few nips,
Mhm.
or, and then they
Mhm.
toss them out of the cars before they leave or on their way out the Natick High driveways and so forth. Um, uh, and I think it could be, well, I was kind of sneaky when I was that age too. So I think there are people who are sophisticated enough to give false answers on surveys
Mm.
and keep it from their parents and
Mhm.
school people. It looks like it's a little more widespread than maybe that data that I saw. Anyway, that's just a worry that I have. And the second question is, do you still have recovery coaches working with your folks? I think you used to have that, or some of the groups did.
Yeah, so to your second question, we have recovery coaches, for folks who aren't familiar, are generally folks who are in recovery, sustained recovery, who actually go through a certification process to be able to coach other folks. It's different from like a 12-step sponsor, which a lot of folks have sort of heard of, perhaps through AA and NA and that sort of thing. Which is an awesome support as well under the 12-step umbrella. A recovery coach is going to work with a person who's seeking recovery or who's in early recovery. And it could be that they're interested in 12-step, but it could also be that they're interested in smart recovery or medication-assisted recovery. Or the kind of framing of a recovery coach is that they're going to support a person in any pathway of recovery they choose for themselves. So they're just looking to support folks in making decisions for themselves that meet their the type of recovery they want. So we work with local agencies that have recovery coaches, so we could connect a person to a recovery coach if they want one. So we don't employ a recovery coach here within the town, but we work with SMHSA is one of the primary ones. There's actually a recovery center in downtown Framingham that we work really closely with. It's called Anchored in Recovery, and they're staffed by SMOC. They have like a director who's an employee of SMOC, but then they employ folks in recovery coaches. They run lots of programming out of Anchored in Recovery and create kind of a safe gathering place for folks to be able to kind of stop by Monday through Friday. They run lots of programming, but they have recovery coaches that we can connect people to.
There's still that recovery high school program.
So yes, there are recovery high schools in Massachusetts. We have per capita, we have some we've got more recovery high schools than any other state that I'm aware of. New York might be close to us now. So the closest one to us here in Natick would be Ostagai High in Boston. There's one in Worcester, one in Beverly, one I think out in the Springfield area, and I don't remember. I think those are all of them at this point.
Can you explain what that is?
Sure. So recovery high school is essentially a high school that would be that any young person who is of high school age who, for whatever reason, finds that in their recovery process they can't be in their home district for school because, let's say, that's where they were using frequently. Let's say that's where they were often purchasing their drugs. Being in that environment is just not it's just not suitable for them in their recovery journey, and they want to be in an academic setting where their recovery journey is built into the day and part of the day. So recovery high schools provide that setting. So recovery goals are happening alongside their academic goals at the same time, and the staff and the educators in those settings are trained to support them in their recovery journey while they're also trying to meet their educational goals to graduate under the state frameworks. So
Thanks,
they're
Lizzie.
small schools. They're small schools, but
Yeah,
sorry, go
and
ahead.
I see Lizzie has put in the chat a list of the ones in Massachusetts. Who pays? We'll go to Sally in just a second, but who pays to attend to those schools? Does that represent an additional cost to the
So
student?
Yeah, so not to the student, it's a combination of state funding, and then just like a school district would potentially have to pay out of district placement for a student who, let's say, had some significant, either physical or emotional or behavioral challenges that meant that they couldn't be sort of like in their home district. If they had to pay for them to go to a specialized school for those specialized services, this would fall under that category. So some of it would be funding from their home district.
Great. Thank you. Sally? Just got to come off mute.
Okay, we'll do that. I have a question for Lizzie. Lizzie, what do the youngsters in high school share with you about what is the most, not that it's any one thing, but do they have a prevalence of what can lead them astray? For example, what's the big drug problem at the high school level?
Yeah, I can start and Astrid and Katie can jump into. I would say so. Most of the students who I work with are students who are the ones who are opting to be part of the We Don't Do Drugs Club at the high school. So I will say the students that I know best are just like the really high achieving, really, really like good stand-up kids. That said, um, a lot of times you hear with people who initiate substance use, a lot of times it's like underlying mental health conditions that they are self-medicating for. What's nice about the rapport I have with the high school kids I work with is that they definitely aren't shy to tell me things. So they're like, oh, there's gonna be a party for like senior skip day or whatever here tomorrow. And I was like, oh, good to know. And then I tell the cops and they know to like kind of be monitoring the area. But I have heard some of the students in particular say like, oh, like we know this kid on like speech and debate team. And they don't tell me his name because I don't need to know his name, but like and like this is actually a quote they told me about a kid on speech and debate team recently. And like he has found that the only way he can like feel good is by like being drunk, which as a 17, 18-year-old is scary and obviously definitely indicates that there's some underlying problems happening there. And those students have said that they've like reached out to see if he wants help and that kind of thing. So definitely that being one of them. I also think like a lot of times like maybe initial substance use might be like, oh, it's social, it's fun, this is how you like, hang out with other people, but then it can like cause obviously this like cascading effect. You had a second question about like what substances kids are using.
Right. What do even the students who are being careful not to, what do they share? And as you just pointed out, one of them, that's a real good helpful example of a speech and debate youngster. Gosh, you think they're in something wholesome, and they're using a crutch to do what they do quite well. It's
Right.
real interesting. How about students in music? Do you have any generalities or anything that they talk?
I wouldn't say I can talk in any generalities about like, students who engage in this kind of extracurricular or tend to behave this way. I mean, you do hear a lot about after like football season's huge around town. After football games, it is very common, as I'm sure Pat knows, that students will go in certain areas and like have their own like parties in the woods. Pekin Cove is a really popular spot right now. Like people. Sorry, Katie?
Coolidge.
Oh, yeah. Coolidge Hill historically has been, I don't know, Pat, do you see a lot of stuff up on Coolidge Hill these days?
It's improved quite a bit. It doesn't seem to be quite the spot anymore. And then the Natick Town Forest doesn't seem to have quite the same party people impact right now. And
that used to be
people,
senior skip day.
the other thing I'm going to say though, it right near there, but now the railroad has built all this fencing along the track, so it's not easy to go back and forth. But the bike area there is a tough area. There
Oh,
are a
the
lot of
jumps.
yeah, a lot of lost kids in there. Some of them are just in there biking and having a good time, but there's a crew in there that's pretty rough. And they build encampments and they burn furniture and I've been down to the fire department and the police department with photos and everything. A few hundred square feet of burn scars and 30 feet up the trees and it's kind of a rough crowd down there and it has been for decades. About a dozen years ago, the town, the Conservation Commission guys went in there and bulldozed it all down, flattened it. The kids built it right back up. I mean, they're really serious about their biking, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Well,
Wow.
I can appreciate their that's the dichotomy of youth and that exercise. They want to do a sport and they want to do activity and they're using drugs. Lizzie, another quick, I was wondering.
Just one more, Sally, and then
Yeah.
we'll go to some more people. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Another quick thing, is there any discussion among the students that want to do well about nutrition and it's, good nutrition helping?
Yeah.
Ever any discussion of that?
Yeah, so part of what I was going to say too before is like alcohol definitely is the number one used substance or drugs, alcohol is a drug, of young people, older and at any age. That's the number one used substance. Youth are, from what the schools say, aren't using a ton of alcohol at school. They don't really catch that. It's mostly like vaping in the bathrooms, that kind of thing. Some cannabis vaping, some tobacco vaping. It's kind of hard to know looking at someone necessarily what they're vaping. Those are definitely the biggest ones. And then this Zyn thing, which is impossible to really tell. Someone could be sitting in your math class and you'd never know. But the piece about nutrition actually is interesting. So historically, the students I work with, because we also have some middle school clubs at each middle school and then also at the high school. The high school students, because their club is the most established, do a lot with substance use and a lot with mental health because of the overlay of those two. I think the middle school kids are interested in doing some nutrition stuff because their clubs are called like Make Healthy Choices, and healthy choices could literally be anything. One thing the high school students did do this year with some like grant funds that we had from last year was make what we call quick kits. So it's like a kit of like fidgets and fun stuff, but then also like other ingredients in them that would be useful to help quit vaping. And they did some research into it, and it's like things like, like chewing gum if you have that oral fixation of like wanting like a vape in your mouth, but then also things like if you have milk, apparently milk would make the vape taste bad, or like having like cinnamon flavored mints, like those like, Altoids can also be helpful. So that's not really a nutrition angle, but like we did kind of see this like thing of like what like food you put in your body could then impact your cravings to vape, or like not having as much caffeine is helpful. So including those like tips inside those quick kits is something that we did do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Let's go to Bill, although I also note that Lizzie had invited Astrid to, chime in on any of this as well. So Astrid, feel free to chime in with any of your answers as well. But Bill.
Yeah, I want to go back to Pegan Cove. I bought Pegan Cove. I have cleaned up after the kids for 10 years now, 10 times a year. So that's 100 times. They average between 80 and up to 200 bottles, cans, and nips per night. I'm getting tired. And I don't know what to do. The kids, I can't count the kids, but I can hear them go in and out. So I know when they party. And they get loud. They use their outdoor voices. And it just seems like we ought to be able to do something about it. The cops know they're there. There may be 50 to 70 kids there. I mean, it's a big group. They go to the fire pit, and what they do is they toss their bottles and cans as far away from the can. Pat put a buddy bin and recycle bins right there. And I'm talking about 80 to 150 bottles, nips, and cans that don't make it into the recycle bin. I don't know how many make it in. So what the hell's that all about? I was at Natick when they did the National Honor Society. My granddaughter's in that, and here's 200 kids that are doing all these responsible things, and then there's another 80 or 100 that are not. And is there anything we can do about that? I mean, I'm tired.
And possibly there's some overlap between those two groups, so relative to that story about the
Yeah.
debate team, but
Yeah, I mean, the reality is there are definitely high functioning kids who are also partying and partaking in some of this stuff for sure. No, thank you for sharing that, Bill. And and I know that has been an area that has had a lot of issues over the years. I have not had a recent conversation in this warm weather moment because I know as the weather's getting warmer, we'll probably be seeing more of it. So I can certainly, I know in the past, Pat has also brought me over to Pagan to do some cleanups together, and I haven't been out yet this season. So I will definitely make a point of getting over there more frequently to help monitor the area. I know in my conversations with Chief Hicks over the years, I think one of the challenges I always heard from him was with their limited patrols, sending officers into the woods and away from their vehicles for longer stretches of time could be a challenge during patrols when they need to be able to respond to other needs in the community. But I can certainly talk with him to see what we could do to up the monitoring of that area this spring and summer, because that it, I anticipate that we'll be seeing more activity in the coming months, not less.
Well,
Do
yeah, I
you think
expected them
that,
this weekend, and they didn't show, so they probably went somewhere else. But
Bill, do you think that the youth come in through the main entrance where the little lot is, or do you think they're coming from a different access point?
that's a great question. A woman at work lives on Cochituate Street, and she's
Mhm.
saying kids are there. In fact, they're getting more rowdy. She was saying that they were running up to her neighbors at 2 o'clock in the morning, ringing the doorbell and running away. That's not good.
Yeah, yeah.
But they come in through the parking lot. They come in through Bellevue Road, and they come in. I think those are the two major
Okay.
ways.
Yeah, I've followed some of this discussion on the Facebook pages. And so I have also known that this has been an issue that's been going on for a while, but it seems to me some upped enforcement would make sense. I think we should definitely be having a conversation with our law enforcement because it's so multifaceted in terms of the ramifications to the neighbors as well as the environment as well as to the youth. So it's probably something that we could take a step in terms of increasing enforcement.
Well, I know when they're coming in, and I know when they're going out. So, if you need me as a contact, I'd be happy to do that.
that's an interesting idea, kind of an alert system they're gathering.
I
Several
will
hands
say,
are, yeah, go ahead.
on that piece of that question, I do think most of them are driving and parking. The name of that field is Navy. They're parking at Navy, and then they're walking down that road. I think that's how most of them get in, because when I've heard kids talk about it, they call it Navy is where they're partying. And then that always confused me because they're not actually partying at Navy. They're partying down the street. So I think that you see a lot of cars parked in that lot late at night. That's what that means.
But
Yeah.
that's helpful. But that's a helpful point, Lizzie, because even parking a police cruiser in that lot, having more monitoring of that area might help deter some kids from then going any further if they saw even that lot monitored more closely.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you for that input, Bill.
yeah. So many hands. Cindy, then Pat again, Sarah, and Bradley. Cindy?
So I have three questions
Okay.
that are all pretty different and pretty big.
Yeah. Ask them all as opposed to waiting for responses for each
Okay.
one. And then, yeah.
Okay. So the first one is where we are now. I often walk at Coolidge Hill, and I have found twice. I have found a bag of logs that have been purchased at a grocery store to burn in their fire pit up there. Once I went back and took it home and gave it to my mom, and the second time I just left it. But my question is, so I could, if I'm walking around, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night in the summer, and I start to see kids going up there, like, is the appropriate response to call the police? Because, like, this whole business of where we were just talking about Navy, like, so the police come and all the kids go away. Well, where do they go? And like, what's to say they don't go find some other place? And it doesn't really get, it's like litter. It doesn't really get, picking it up doesn't really solve the problem. And so that's my one question. My other question is how in the school curriculum, I know you go to middle schools, you go to the high school, but in the regular classroom, science classes, how much are kids learning about nutrition and how their brains work and how their body works, so that they have kind of an academic, at least background, that they don't have it necessarily connected when they go vape or they drink or whatever, but at least they have something like that. I'm curious about that. And then I've been reading that alcohol use is actually down among younger folks and among older folks, and it's greatest nationally, so let's say, for folks in their like 40s. And I'm wondering about that. And I'm wondering the age ranges of the folks that you serve in Natick. We're talking a lot about kids, but these problems of clearly recovery, but then there continues to be addiction throughout someone's life. And just sort of curious about, I don't know, a shape of a curve of the ages, the population that you are involved with. So that was almost 4 questions, sorry.
All right, let me see what I can tackle. So I would say what you're reading is consistent with what we're hearing and seeing, that we have seen a decline overall in alcohol use among youth, and I've seen a few different things for seniors. I've seen some suggesting there's been a decline. I've seen some suggesting that there's been, that it's stable, but yes, we do see some of the highest rates of alcohol use among folks in their sort of like 40s and 50s. And I think that's been a culmination of a lot of different things. I think, first of all, we have seen nationally a decline in underage drinking over the past like 20 years. So, I mean, to both validate what we're hearing today, that alcohol continues to be the #1 substance that youth are using, and it clearly has all of these impacts, not just on the youth themselves, but on the community around them. Like, that continues to definitely be an issue. And we don't see youth drinking now like they were drinking in the 80s and 90s. So we've seen those declines. It is also worth noting, and I say this as a person in my 40s myself, the highest rates of drinking are among a lot of the cohort who were doing a lot of the drinking in the 80s and 90s, right? So going back to that point, that when we start using a substance younger, we're at higher risk for using, and I'm not saying everybody who's drinking in their 40s are addicted or anything like that, but it is sort of consistent that the folks who would have been drinking more in the 80s and 90s are now, as adults, often the ones who are drinking more. And it's also just more socially acceptable, or perceived by a lot of people as socially acceptable to, like, oh, like wine moms is a label that didn't exist that I'm aware of a gazillion, a number of years ago. But there's a whole term now for describing moms, especially in the suburbs, as, oh, they're wine moms, because like they get together and, drink wine while they socialize, and their kids might be off playing together, but they're, enjoying their wine, and sometimes it's margaritas and sometimes it's something else, like now it's also edibles too. I mean, like, there is a certain subculture within even just like parenting blogs and stuff like that are sort of like, oh, we can still have fun and take care of ourselves, like our mental health, by enjoying an edible or enjoying wine. So I do think there's a lot of messaging there that is a tough nut to crack. In the past, we actually had been working with a young woman in recovery who was also a mom, who was trying to start sort of like these like sober gatherings for other folks who were just looking to like normalize enjoying social connection without alcohol. And it's been sort of like, I would say, an up and down process trying to kind of promote that and get the buy-in, in part too because it's been hard for some people in those spaces to stay sober themselves. So it's been a real challenge up and down. As to your question about the curriculum at the schools, we find, especially when we go in to talk about mental health and substance use, that the students are getting a lot of content about their brain development. I mean, like in the middle school, they know very early on that their brain is still developing into their 20s. Like they get that messaging, which is really helpful. And I think especially in the PE classes and the health classes at the middle school and the high school, they do get a lot of nutrition information. I think that's actually part of the reason why the health classes, the health teachers often like us coming in to talk about mental health and substance use, because they feel like their students need to hear the messaging reinforced about mental health and substance use, because they have to cover so much content over the course of their year that they don't want the substance use and mental health topics to get lost in the grand scheme of things. So they like having us come in, or have the high school students come in, because it helps reinforce, like, here are other perspectives that are telling you how important this is. And our high schoolers, when they talk about like trying to set kind of when they try to reframe the middle schoolers' understanding of substance use, they also try to talk about, here are the things that are stressful about high school. Like, and here are the things that I was worried about or scared of that ended up not being as bad as I thought it was going to be in high school. But here are the other things that do feel stressful. Like, yeah, like trying to stay on top of all your schoolwork is stressful. The tests can be stressful, but like, here's how I deal with it instead of doing X, Y, or Z, or here's why I choose not to use substances. And more people than are like me than aren't at the high school. So that's sort of the messaging they try to reinforce. And to your question too about like, what do we do when, like, you disperse the kids from one scene, and then where are they going to go? They're likely going to go to another. I mean, that is the perennial challenge of every cohort of parents that's parented over the years and every community. I almost think that this is sort of like, do you remember during the pandemic when we were talking about the Swiss cheese approach to public health, that you try to put enough supports and enough things in place that even though no intervention is totally perfect, but if you have enough of them stacked on top of each other, fewer people will fall through the holes. It's a little bit of that. And so like the dispersing the kids, maybe that does mean that there's still going to be a group of those kids that are still going to go and hang out at somebody's house or in another spot. The more challenging it gets to like find a spot to get together and drink, the more likely they are at some point, or at least some of them, to say like, I have to be home by 12 anyway. I can't do, like, and then so some of them will go home. Not all of them will. And so we're constantly trying to rack our brains for how to continue to come up with more ways.
So is it appropriate then to call the police if I see kids going up there?
You certainly can. You can certainly call I would call the non-emergency line. I wouldn't call 911, but I'd call the non-emergency line, give them that information. And if it's not a heavy call volume night, they will send a patrol up there. So, and I'm going to be sharing what we're talking about here. I will be bringing some of this back to Chief Hicks too. I mean, it sounds like some of you have already talked to the department anyway, but I will reinforce some of what we're talking about with him as well.
There's a woman, Laura, who's just started working for the Natick Trails maintenance group, and she's reporting like weekly the amount of glass that kids are throwing at rocks, and just to watch them shatter. And she goes, she's picking up bags and bags and bags and bags.
Yeah.
So, and that's at the bottom, but there's also at the top. It's better, maybe, but it's still there. Thank you.
Kind of there's this ancillary activity of kind of destructive things, tossing things 30 feet up in the tree and breaking glass, and related but separate from the actual addictive substances. Pat, and then Sarah, and then
Sorry, can I?
Oh yes, sorry. Go ahead, Lizzie.
I don't want to keep us taking too long, but a couple things that Katie just didn't touch upon, and there's very obviously a lot in that answer. But I think a lot of it comes down to, we talk about this a lot, and in our work is the modeling piece. Like, there's a lot of evidence to support that, like, whether or not parents think what they're saying to their kid is actually like getting through and their kid's actually listening, but a lot of evidence supports that parents and caregivers are actually the number one impact in what kids choose to do in terms of behaviors i.e. substance use in this situation. So a lot of it is like, Katie always gives example, like, don't show at home with your children, like that the way that is appropriate to de-stress after a long day is that glass of wine or whatever it might be. But then also there's this whole like thing, which is very strange to me still, of parents condoning kids partying. So like when I talk to the high school kids that I know, they do say like, when there's a party happening, it more often than not is at a kid's house with the parent home, knowing that the party's happening. It's not like parents are at the Cape for the weekend, like I was always assuming it was. Parents are in the loop, and I mean, there's some mentality of like, well, if they're gonna do it, I'd rather them do it under my roof. But there is definitely a mentality of that, uh, for sure happening. And then the last piece on the health class part, we actually have really good connections with the health classes at all three schools and the two middle schools and the high school because we go in so often. And what we hear a lot from the staff is, first off, I think the curriculum they're doing is fantastic. I think they're doing a lot in the short period of time that they have. But the biggest complaint the teachers have is that like health is like such like a special. It's not like one of the core things that you're getting. So when you're in high school, you actually have health for one semester and only when you're a sophomore. So you don't see it again for 2 years until you graduate. So that's just really hard on the teachers because they want to like get as much in as possible, but there's only so many like hours in the day they can work with. And I do think there's like the kids, to Katie's point, definitely know like the whole brain development addiction thing, but there is this like, oh, well, that's not going to happen to me, or like, oh, that will be when I'm old and I'm not going to think about that yet. Like there is a huge mentality of that. Like they get it, but it hasn't like fully connected that like this could be them. So just wanted to add those couple pieces.
Thank you very much.
Kids can feel invincible at that age.
One quick follow-up is, have you thought about how you might address parents with that message when you were saying about parties? Is that like at a back to school night? I don't know, like
Yeah.
it would be interesting.
Yeah, in the past we've done it. We used to do a social host liability seminar or training with Chief Hicks for parents. The attendance it was always tiny, and it was often not the folks who needed to hear it. So I mean, we put out some social host messaging every spring. But yeah, I mean, I do think that we could probably work with school administration to come up. I mean, one thing that I've suggested in the past that didn't quite land, and I don't know if there might be more openness to it now, but the idea of like, in order for your student to like purchase a prom ticket, there has to be like sign off by a parent, like that they've, read or viewed a video or something about social host liability so that they understand like the fines and everything and liabilities they could be opening themselves up to if they hosted a party.
You can take my down.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that, Pat. And then we'll move to Brindley. Sarah's topic has been addressed.
Yes, thanks for all that information. And I was going to just mention back to Pekin Cove, even when my son Brett was on the police force, they'd sent a bicycle officer down a few times, and that helped a little bit. They didn't do it as often as I think they could have or should have, and then I think the idea of parking the cruiser in the parking lot at certain times, it's true that if it disrupts it a little bit and you make it, a little more difficult, I think you can really help. I mean, it's still going to go on sometime. But the other thing that I noticed when we did this cleanup at the high school this last week at a memorial field and around the hockey rink and the DPW, that area is severely impacted by trash, and there ought to be a way to get the high school and DPW and the hockey rink folks on it together to do something about it, because it really it's right there it's their front yard, and it was nasty, and it really it would seem like the high school study halls could. I had 30 or 40 pickers. I could come over with pickers and they could go crazy there for about, once a month or something. And they'll clean it up. But we didn't get to everything. I was trying to tell Lizzie, there's plenty of other areas that we didn't get to. But And the other thing is, it's not all students. That's the other thing I want to make sure people realize they're adult fishermen, people that go to these areas and they fish and they drink. I do it at Fisk Pond, they do it over at Keegan, they do it, Dog Pond a lot, and it's the high school parking lots are used by many other towns, not just the Natick kids, but other adults that come for the games and everything. So there's a widespread culpability. So
Yeah.
Yeah, and I see Astrid wants to speak. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering if maybe there's any type of drone activity that could be implemented, not so much more as a deterrent and not as a data collection piece, but I'm wondering if the police might be able to use that kind of a tactic just to help try to disperse some of the youth rather than, like I said, collecting any personal information on anybody.
I don't know. Interesting question. Optics wise, it could be a tough sell. I have a feeling that could end up in front of the select board real fast if people felt like right, or the kids who are throwing things up in the trees might start checking things at the drones. I don't know, but I mean, I think the question of how do we surveil these kind of hard to reach areas without also making people feel like they're being, without creating what feels like a Big Brother state, I think is certainly a question. But Pat, I appreciate your point too about that area around the pond and DPW and everything. I mean, I know Lizzie has brought some of her students over to do a cleanup in that area, but it's like, once in the fall and that doesn't get you through the year. I mean, we could certainly talk to DPW and see and the rink and see if they have any thoughts about how we could work together more in that space.
I brought it up to Jillian too, and I met with Jillian, and it's not her area,
right.
But we've got some people in DPW that are willing to work with us. But it's still, we got a lot of room for improvement.
Yeah. I want to go to Brindley, but what I'm really hearing in a lot of this conversation is, clearly right from the introductions, we know that there are a lot of trash pickers on this group, but it isn't just about the trash. It's about what people discarding all this stuff says about the way they conduct themselves in their lives and problems that they might be having. And Astrid's question about drones, it's just I think what we're hearing here is that we as a community want to watch ourselves and look out for ourselves. And this is it's like finding COVID outbreaks by looking at the wastewater. We're seeing symptoms of things going on in the community by what all these wonderful people picking up trash are doing. And maybe drones wouldn't work, but what other ways are there to kind of make it first and foremost that this is a community that takes care of itself and watches out for itself. But I want to move to Brindley. She's been very patient.
Thanks. So you guys started to touch on where I wanted to get to earlier with the questioning from Cindy about parents and Lizzie's response about parents and health class. But I was wondering if we could expand on it just a little bit more, because I feel like it's actually a really huge issue. So I sometimes help people with campaigns. And one of the jobs that I have when I help with campaigns is social media monitoring, which is a really drain, and I absolutely don't recommend it for anybody. But when you do that for a couple of months and start watching, you realize just how much it's changed for the acceptance of youth to be drinking and that they're just being kids. And we did the same thing. And I really see it a lot. And now, because so many of the Natick focused social media groups allow anonymous posting, people have really come out of the woodworks. And I'd like to say it feels mostly like moms, just most because I see mostly of it in the moms group, but I am seeing it on other groups as well, like the Natick, like the Real Natick Talks and other groups. And so in those groups, I don't know if it's men contributing to the conversation as well, because they're all anonymous. So I do wonder where it is coming from majorly, but parents really, there really are a large vocal group in Natick specifically that are saying they think it's okay for kids to be exploring and drinking and kids being kids. And it feels like anytime anybody mentions, addiction or anything that moves forward, that they are ridiculed and chastised. And it really feels like the conversation is shut down. And I'm wondering if there's something in process for how to help those of us who would like to respond, some type of a standard, something that we can do. Like, is there a graphic that can be posted? Is there what can, for the adults that want to help this, because we understand and have history in our friends and families, and get the developmental problem that it is. What can we work on around that? Is there signage that we can use? Like, I wonder sometimes, I know in my high school, I'm old, so this was a long time ago, but I remember at my high school, there was a pretty severe accident, and they literally put the car at the high school in the parking lot for a while to remind people of what had happened. And I know that's dramatic, but there's a car that lives on Cottage that every time I drive by, I wonder why it's still sitting there and it's all beat up. And I wonder if it's a message, and I think about it in relation to this conversation every time, even though I don't know what the reason is that car is sitting there. It makes me think that. And so I wonder if there's a direction for that we can go and can work on, because it really does seem to be a lot right now, social media. And I also wonder, in the health class, both of my kids, because I'm recent in this, I do have a sophomore, both of my kids talk about the health class and what it's covered. And I wonder if there is a way to have a conversation about it coming out of health class, and to be more a part of additional curriculums, that even if it's only, once or twice, that it could be talked about in chemistry class, right? In chemistry classes, juniors, it would be another way to approach it, that there could be a section, even if it's only 2 days, there could be a section that talks about what this is and what it does to your brain. It seems like that would be a very easy thing to add to the curriculum, because the information is already there. It's just adding a day of it, right? And that there are other classes that the kids all have to take, that it could do that as well. And I've droned on a lot, but that's the most of it.
Yeah, no, you touched upon a lot you touched on a lot of really important things. And I do think that idea of trying to get more kind of like cross, intercurriculum kind of integration of this topic in other topic areas, I think is a good one. And certainly when we could mention to our partners over in school administration, I think that what you're talking about with trying to sort of like make inroads with parent culture is so important, and one of our biggest challenges, to be quite honest with you, because it has, over the years, we've hosted screenings of films that are about, like either even not branding it as social hosting, but like talking about like how to support your teen and having an active social life, like how to keep your teen socially connected without substance use and stuff like that. And it's so hard to get parents. The parents who are most likely to come out to those topics are often parents like you, who are trying to make a difference on the topic, and not necessarily the parents who are perhaps feeling very reflective about maybe what their house rules are, what their monitoring is. And I do think there is some element of this too that's a little bit of like this, like kind of like response in some ways to even like COVID and stuff. Like, we finally are like, people were so unhappy with like the way things were shut down. We were disconnected from each other that there's this tendency to think like, oh, well, I'd rather my kid be, drinking in my basement with their friends like I did when I was their age than like on their devices or socially isolated from each other. I think there's also what we often hear too from parents is, well, I'd rather my kid use cannabis than like ADHD meds or prescription meds. So I think we have sort of a little bit of like this backlash both to COVID and to the opioid crisis that has also kind of contributed to this sort of like spirit of I'd rather my kids be doing sort of what I consider to be like just part of what, part of like the milestone of youth development of kind of like drinking with their friends than getting into quote harder drugs. And what they might not realize is that you're actually increasing the risk for all of that when kids are drinking and when they're connecting socialization to substance use, that the two are inextricably linked to each other. So I do think, I mean, Brinley, what you're saying does, I think make me think that it would be really helpful for us to put together some new social media messages, or maybe or like you were saying, maybe some memes or graphics or something that would be shareable. One person I will absolutely recommend, well, there are a couple of people I would recommend if you happen to be like on Instagram or Facebook. Jessica Lahey does these phenomenal like brief talks on her Instagram feed. So Jessica wrote the New York Times bestseller, The Gift of Failure. And then she has subsequently had a book called The Addiction Inoculation. And so Jessica actually is from this area originally. She grew up, I believe, in Dover, became an educator, was like a high school teacher, also recognized that she was drinking too much at some point, and so now considers herself to be in recovery, but does these very like consumable, oh, thank you, Brinley, for putting that in the chat. She does these very like consumable, almost like mini TED Talks, where she just does these like little bite-size little talks that she posts on Instagram that are about different adolescent development pieces, but a lot of them are around how do I have a conversation with my kid about drinking? How do I have a conversation with my kid about, look, I know all your friends are going to this party. Here's what I want you to know about healthy decision making, and here's why I'm not letting you go, or here's why perhaps I will consider letting you go, but here are my ground rules, and here's how you reach out to me if you find yourself in a sticky situation, and here's what I can commit to you, that we are, if you call me and you're honest with me, you are never going to get in trouble. Like like there may be a consequence to certain actions that we have to talk about, but I am not going to be mad at you. I am only going to be proud of you for calling me, even when you've messed up. She just does a really great job of putting those things in consumable ways. We've had her as a presenter here in Natick before for a virtual event. We have copies of her book that we've given out, but I do think that we could do a better job of taking some of those little tidbits and making them into like graphics or social media posts that would be easier to kind of share. Because I do think there's just a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation. And I do think it's generally coming from a good place of parents who just want their kids to be safe. So it's like, I'd rather they be under my roof, and I'd rather I know what they're consuming, right? I'd rather I buy the beer for them so that they're not smoking something that somebody bought from somebody else. Like I understand that mentality, and the research suggests that kids take from that a tendency of, oh, my parents are okay with this, and actually socialization and substance use is actually kind of what it means to have fun and to be an adult, because that's what I see my parents doing too. So then they go into college and they're often the ones who are using quite a bit as well. So yeah, I appreciate that feedback about the messaging that we need to make more inroads on. And I think it does have to be more on social media and not necessarily only in these like educational forums, because again, we're not often getting the people we need to actually attend those.
looks like Astrid wanted
Maybe.
to add. Yeah.
I just want to tag on to that for a second. Two campaigns that we've done. One you may have seen because we've been doing it for a number of years now, but we have our youth from our Natty group go into the liquor stores once a year, right around prom and graduation season, and they stick stickers onto large packs of alcohol that might appeal to younger drinkers. And the stickers remind adults not to purchase for anyone under the age of 21. So it's just kind of a yearly reminder that we have, we engage our youth in that activity so they get something out of it as well as the larger community. And then I just wanted to mention briefly, a number of years ago, we tried a campaign that we thought was really great. It was called Parents Who Host Lose the Most. And they were these lawn signs that we placed around town in addition to promoting some educational materials about social host liability. And Katie may remember this, but unfortunately, a group of parents who felt that that message was, inappropriate in some way, went around and collected the signs and took them out of people's yards who were displaying them. So again, it was probably a very small subset of parents who maybe disagreed with that message for an unknown reason, but it showed us that we do need to continue to educate in that space.
Yeah. I wonder if there's an opportunity for creating like an anonymous brigade, sorry, because, so many people post anonymously now, and it makes me nervous myself to speak up because I have a kid at the high school. So, word gets around,
Yeah.
It's amazing how quick it can get around for one person can say, oh, I heard so-and-so's mom said such and such, or so-and-so's dad did blah, blah, blah. And so it makes anybody that wants to try to show another side really nervous, I think. So I'm wondering if maybe there's a way that you could say, hey, we want to create an anonymous brigade and we'll keep it anonymous and we'll just, here's resources for you to post so that you can post these anonymously. So maybe when you create those, you could also create, a task force, as it were, of people who are willing to post anonymously. In those examples. And then also just to say, I'm grateful for the Natty group. I helped Sarah and I, among others, helped organize the Earth Day all around Natick this year, and having them there and talking to them and watching them for what they were doing was really so fantastic. And I'm so grateful for them as a group. They were stellar young adults, being there doing that work and standing out there all day in the weather and the willingness to do that. And please do extend an extra special thanks to them for that. Again, for you guys being there. I was really grateful for that.
Yeah, I think your slide said there were 30 people in that group. That was really encouraging. I just want to be mindful of time. I really appreciate all of the time that you folks are spending with us. Bill's been patient. Bill, I thought you had to leave about 15 minutes ago, actually, but
I did, but Brindley kind of downplayed the value of my thought. But I'm old school, no social media. And in the old days, you had an impact when the police pulled up at your house with the lights flashing and delivered your drunk son to you. I think if they did that once a week for a month or so, they would shame enough parents to make them think about what they're doing. Not going to happen, but I just share that as another alternative that we haven't considered yet. So thank you guys again for coming and all you do. This has really been great. Thanks.
Bill, I just want to say I had written down in my notes to talk about why don't we set up a breathalyzer right there in the parking lot one time and make these kids blow when they come out before they get in their cars and come out. But I refrained, but because I'm old school like you, but I definitely had those thoughts.
Well,
A lot of them Uber, unfortunately.
One of the things the Natick police did tell me was that they do come and they do monitor for the kids drinking and driving. And that's a piece of it. But I don't know that they do that now. But that's a whole nother topic. So anyway, thanks.
Lizzie, thanks for putting the link into your newsletter. Sarah, you had a question, and then maybe we should think about letting these good folks go. But
It's not really a question, it's a comment, and actually might be kind of a good wrap-up comment of just listening to the discussion about kids drinking and partying and trashing places and sneaking into the bathroom and all this stuff. Um, just and the idea, oh, kids are being kids. That really there's a whole multifaceted thing going on here. I mean, I was a very tame kid. I wasn't a go party in the woods and drink beer with my friends kid, but I understand the mentality to want to have your own space where you can do what you want. And so I kind of get that. I took one puff of a cigarette when I was 13 because my best friend dared me to or wanted me to, and I didn't like it, never tried it again. So that was quote unquote experimenting. I wasn't supposed to be smoking. And as I say, I was a very tame kid, but I did that. So I think, there's on the one extreme, probably there are kids that are even tamer than me that never tried a cigarette at all. But at the harder, at the other end are kids that are, I hate to say it, but almost unreachable, that are so, their parents encourage it or support it. And, that's just kind of the way they are, at least right now. But there's so many kids along that range. And, I think unfortunately we may not be 100% successful no matter what we do, but we need to keep trying a lot of different things because there's different ways we'll reach different people. And, it's really complicated. And as I say, even though I never was that kid, I do get that mentality. Those kids want to be somewhere. They need a place to have their social time with friends, and unfortunately, they're choosing to do it in the woods and being rowdy and disturbing the neighbors and getting drunk and making trash and burning. They're doing a lot of stuff that's very negative, but underlying it all is this need to be socializing with their friends. And until we can find a healthier way that they buy into, I think this problem's going to keep going. And that's all I'll say.
Well, I think you're right that this problem is always going to exist in some shape or form. I do think that the rates of youth use have come down. So we know that there's progress being made. It will never be zero, that's for sure. But I do think part of it, and I always go back to, I think Pat has had some of the wisest words around this topic and related topics over the years. So much of what we're up against in this world, especially in this particular moment, is how disposable so many things feel. I mean, I think a lot of times our kids who are struggling are trying to find their own sense of authenticity, and they're trying to find connection with other people, and they don't necessarily know how to do it in a comfortable way. And that's where substance use comes into play. And we see the ill effects that can have when substance use is a big part of that process. But I think coming back to helping members of our community, including those parents who aren't always making the decisions or doing the modeling that we maybe prefer that they do, but recognizing that at the heart of it, they're often trying to find connection with their kid, or they're trying to keep their kids safe. And so so much of this comes back to connection, trying to see that people are doing the best that they can with what they know. And so it's us needing to put out more messaging in more consumable ways, because I think that's what we often struggle with on our end, is how do we put this out there in a way that the people who need to hear it or see it are gonna hear and see it. And so that's also where getting to chat with folks like you all is so helpful, because you're interacting with members of the community that we don't necessarily interact with. And so the more we can kind of have these dialogues that happen in different places and different corners of the community, the more opportunity we have to share resources, and maybe something from today's conversation finds its way into a conversation one of you are having with somebody the next time you're at the farmer's market, or you're standing in line at the grocery store or something like that. And so I just want to thank you all too for all of the really for the really thoughtful and informative feedback, the questions. They've all been really, really helpful to us, and remind us of all the work that still is there to be done, but also of all the folks in this community that really care genuinely about both our youth and also those who are actively experiencing substance use issues. So thank you so much for your care and for giving us the opportunity to connect today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Katie and Lizzie and Astrid, for joining us. It's been a very enriching conversation. It's a difficult problem. As you say, it'll never be solved, but you guys are doing so much in so many different ways. And as you can tell, we're anxious to help in any way that we can as well. So thanks again. Just to wrap up today, a reminder that next Monday we will not have a coffee with purpose. Hopefully everybody will be enjoying various Memorial Day activities. It'll be interesting to see our new Veterans Director leading, presumably, observances. I haven't seen the details yet about that, but maybe that's a segue into turning it over to Brindley or anyone else that wants to bring us up to date on current events of things that we should be thinking about in this coming week.
I can say there's a school committee meeting tonight. I always encourage people to pay attention. It's the largest part of our budget. I do think that having people, even if they don't have kids in the system, it really is a sign of who we are as a town, I think, our education system. And so I always welcome people to tune in. Memorial building will be on there, as well as a few other things that people might find of interest. That's it for this week.
Cool.
And I will say, I do also think that one of the things with kids is just rebellion, wanting to find their own sense of independence. And so I think sometimes that a lot of what we do, a lot of what they do, I remember how I felt when I was 16 and 17 and not wanting people to tell me what to do. And, finding a way to help support the sense of independence and finding their own sense of independence that's outside of drinking and drugging is always the challenge.
Yeah, I think you're so right. Kids need a way to test themselves.
Yeah.
And if we don't have, safe and constructive ways for them to test themselves, it's not that they're not going to test themselves, they're going to find ways that are not so constructive. So that's kind of the point I was trying to make. If this is a piece of who you are as a teenager, you want to test yourself, you want to hang out with your friends and, establish your independence and all that stuff.
Yeah, good points. And Lizzie, thank you for putting in a chat in terms of current events. It is Mental Health Awareness Month, and Spark Kindness is having an event tonight that Lizzie has put a link to in the chat. Well, thank you all. It's been great as usual. Enjoy the rest of the week. Perhaps we'll see some of you guys at Memorial Day observances, and then we'll reconvene in the 1st of June, I believe it is. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording at this point.